And we're back with our politics lead. Former President Trump, quote, more likely than not, unquote, committed a crime when he tried to obstruct the certification of the presidential election on January 6, 2021. That unusually bold statement was issued by federal judge David Carter today. Carter says Trump's lawyer, John Eastman, was also culpable. And now Eastman's emails, which laid out a blueprint for an unconstitutional attempt to overturn the election, are heading over to the January 6th committee. Joining me now to discuss, New York Times' Maggie Haberman and CNN Plus's Casey Hunt. So, Maggie, let me start with you. Judge Carter went on to say, quote, the illegality of the plan was obvious. Trump has already avoided full impeachment and removal twice. How big a deal of this is this, actually?
It's a big deal, and it isn't quite what it looks like, Jake. It's not an indictment. This is not coming from the Justice Department. But this is, an external person. This is a judge. This is somebody making a very declarative statement about what this meant. And so to the extent that we are seeing the Justice Department facing pressure from outside points, I do think that it's significant. Whether it's going to result in anything, we don't know. But this is the clearest that anyone has been, anyone in a real position of such seniority and authority to say this was wrong, this was it. There's a key quote in there about it being a coup in search of a legal argument. That's a pretty damning statement.
Yeah, and there's a difference between a Democratic senator saying it or
right.
a pundit saying it and a judge,
That's
a
right.
federal judge.
Exactly.
And Casey, neither the judge nor the January 6th committee is actually able to prosecute Trump and his allies or anyone else. That's just not in their powers.
Right.
Does President Biden need to tread lightly when it comes to Attorney General Merrick Garland and whether or not he decides to pursue Trump in a prosecution, especially before a 2024 election?
Well, I don't know about Biden needing to tread lightly. I feel like President Biden has been pretty clear in saying that he wants it to be very obvious that the Department of Justice is an independent operation. I think that's been one of the things and one of the places where he wanted to make the clearest of breaks with the Trump administration and the way they operated. And Merrick Garland, I think, frankly, has generated some frustration on the left by his, caution and deliberate carefulness in handling all sorts of these kinds of issues. So I think you're going to likely see that continue.
Yeah, and Maggie, in more January 6 news, a source tells CNN that Trump's son-in-law, Jared Kushner, is going to appear before the committee this week, the January 6th House committee. What do you make of this? As I recall, he spent a lot of that post-presidential time trying to achieve the Abraham Accords, which probably would have gotten a lot more attention if President Trump wasn't trying to subvert the Constitution.
Right, and trying to end the blockade of Qatar in the Middle East. He was not around on January 6th until the afternoon. He was basically removed, as you say, when a lot of this was going on. But he certainly, I think, may have been more aware of it, or at least as background noise. He certainly could speak to the state of mind that his father-in-law was in. And so I think the committee is going to look for that from him. But in terms of whether they're going to get a whole lot of engagement on, the sort of secret plan, for lack of a better way of putting it, that they're looking for here as existing in the lead up to January 6th, I don't think from what our reporting shows that Jared Kushner has a ton of information.
Yeah, and Casey, let's turn to the Supreme Court because West Virginia Democratic Senator Joe Manchin says he's a yes for Judge Ketanji Brown Jackson's confirmation, which basically guarantees she will be confirmed. You sat down with an exclusive interview with Republican Senator Mitt Romney from Utah on his vote for your new CNN Plus show. CNN Plus is our new streaming service. It launches at midnight Eastern this evening. Let's take a quick look.
What was behind your colleagues and the way that they questioned her?
Well, some colleagues on my side of the aisle, I thought, asked respectful questions and were able to elicit responses from her that I think were very helpful to those that are making an evaluation. I thought some were preparing for their presidential campaign and were, if you will, doing the things you have to do to get on TV. Which I think is unfortunate. I think any setting like this that doesn't show respect for the witness, or in this case, the judge, is not the right way for us to go. We should show, in my opinion, more respect for one another. So sometimes the rhetoric was a little hot. But I think in the final analysis, we'll each be able to make our decision based upon our personal interviews with Judge Jackson and with the results that come from these hearings.
Have you made up your mind about how you're going to vote? I know you voted against her confirmation to her current post.
Yeah, I have begun a deeper dive, a much deeper dive than I had during the prior evaluation. And in this case as well, she's gone into much more depth, talking about her judicial philosophy than she had before. And we're, of course, looking at her judicial record. as a district judge and as an appellate judge in far more depth than we had before. So I'll complete that analysis and then reach a decision, but I've not reached my decision.
Do you think he's leaning one way or the other?
Well, Jake, it's very interesting. So I've covered Mitt Romney for a lot of years, and he is very focused on being on public decency, so to speak. So I thought it was interesting that he said what he said about his colleagues. While he was kind of gentle in his criticism for Mitt Romney, that's a pretty high level of offense. And I think that
for those who don't speak Romney, that is foul language.
Yes, exactly.
That is a stern rebuke.
He would not use the same words that Ben Sasse used because that would be swearing, and that's not a thing that Mitt Romney does in public. But he, I think, clearly was offended by what happened in the Judiciary Committee. I think it is entirely possible, and just based on kind of reading the way he approached this with me, that he will vote yes for Ketanji Brown Jackson. I also think it's entirely possible he sticks with his party with Mitch McConnell and votes no. What I think is potentially at the center of this is civil rights and the advancement of African Americans. I think the idea for him of voting against the first African American woman to be appointed to the Supreme Court might stand a little bit at odds with some of the things that he takes the most pride in, particularly his father's legacy on civil rights. George Romney had a legacy on civil rights, and as a Mormon, I think Mitt Romney is very acutely aware of what it's like to be a minority and to try and advance and protect the rights of minorities. So that's what I'm going to be looking at as he tries to make this decision. And I think it was part, too, of some of the offense that he described as to how she was treated in the hearings.
One of the things that's interesting, there used to be an era not that long ago when you would vote for somebody for Supreme Court if they were qualified, having nothing to do with whether or not you agreed with their politics or their judicial philosophy. I have no idea what Senator Romney's going to do, but I could see him longing for those days where he could vote for a liberal justice the way the conservatives used to vote for liberal justices and vice versa.
Jake, I think that's right. I could certainly see him longing for those days. I think he frankly probably does long for those days, but whether he is going to go with that, as a bit of hope and go ahead with it, I think remains to be seen. I think that you are seeing a country that is pretty split down the middle, and you are seeing all the institutions heading that way in one direction or the other.
All right. It's so great to see both of you, and I'm so excited about your new show.
Thank you, Jake. I'm excited about the book club, also on CN+.
Okay, yeah, we'll talk about that at another time. But Maggie Haberman, you can read her in the Times, of course, and catch Casey's full interview with Senator Mitt Romney. That's tomorrow, the official launch of CNN+. That's our new streaming service. The Source with Casey Hunt streams live at 4 p.m. Monday through Friday on CNN+. Will always be available on demand on that service, CNN+. Coming up, the new policies that sparked this week. In our politics lead, a federal judge's ominous signal to Donald Trump and one of his top legal allies in the failed and unconstitutional attempt to overturn the 2020 election. The judge today writing that Trump and attorney John Eastman may have been planning a crime. Judge David Carter, a Clinton appointee, wrote, quote, "Based on the evidence, the court finds it more likely than not that President Trump corruptly attempted to obstruct the joint session of Congress on January 6, 2021. The judge also writing, quote, "The illegality of the plan was obvious." Let's bring in attorney and CNN legal analyst Ellie Honig. Ellie, how big a deal is this? Because just to be clear, the ruling was not about charging Trump with a crime.
Right, Jake. First things first. This is not an indictment. This does not ensure there will be an indictment. Still, though, this is a remarkable and really unprecedented ruling. The dispute here was the committee was trying to get certain emails between this lawyer, John Eastman, Donald Trump. Eastman said, can't have them. They're protected by attorney-client privilege. The committee argued, no, we get them because of what's called the crime fraud exception, because they're evidence of an ongoing crime. And this is the remarkable part. The judge said, I agree. I find more likely than not that the president of the United States committed multiple federal crimes relating to the coup attempt. That is really something we've never seen before from a federal judge.
Yeah, there's no attorney-client privilege if they're conspiring together to commit a crime. So who will decide if Trump will be charged with a crime? And does this judge's opinion in this matter impact that at all?
No, it does not. So this decision comes down to the United States Department of Justice and ultimately really one person, Merrick Garland. Important to know also, this judge made his ruling, but more likely than not, what we call a preponderance of the evidence. That's here in terms of legal standards. In order to charge a crime, a prosecutor has to show proof beyond a reasonable doubt. That is much higher standard. That's a much different story. But this decision will up the pressure, the political pressure on DOJ to take meaningful action.
We're also learning that Trump's son-in-law, Jared Kushner, is expected to speak with the January 6th committee this week. What might the committee learn from him?
So he could be a really interesting witness, Jake, because Jared Kushner likes to position himself as sort of the grown-up in the room. I'll leave that to people's determinations whether that's true or not. But he was at a bit of a remove from January 6th, physically and otherwise. And so if he's willing to be forthcoming, perhaps he can give his perspective as sort of a sane-minded outsider. But let's also remember, Ivanka Trump, she was right next to Donald Trump this whole time. They've asked her for her testimony. She sort of brushed off the committee. They need to subpoena her if she doesn't talk to them voluntarily, because she has direct, crucial information.
And lastly, quickly, if you could, the January 6th committee wants to ask Virginia Thomas, she's the wife of Supreme Court Justice Clarence Thomas, about her text messages with then White House Chief of Staff Mark Meadows, which Meadows handed over to the committee before he stopped cooperating with them.
Yeah.
We're told the committee members are going to meet privately this evening to discuss what to do about Ginny Thomas. What do you make of this?
This is not a tangent. This is not some sideshow at all. This is right down the heart of what the committee needs to be looking at. These texts really are game changers. They show us, we've known that Ginny Thomas has these sort of extreme political views. That's fine. She's entitled. But those texts show us that she was urging Mark Meadows, a very powerful person, to take action to bring this coup into effect. That's crucial. That's right down the heart of what the committee needs to look at.
All right, Ellie Honig, thank you so much. Really appreciate it. Coming up ahead, signs of... You can try to look on the bright side in our money lead today. It seems safe to say gasoline prices have stabilized, at least for now. AAA puts the national average at just under $4.25 a gallon, the same as last week, 8 cents less than the all-time high earlier this month. Still, a gallon of gas in the U.S. is about $1.39 more than at this time last year. And stable or not, that hurts. It's also one of the reasons why President Biden's approval rating is only 40% in a recent CNN poll of polls. Let's talk about pocketbook issues and more with CNN's Richard Quest. Richard, good to see you. Inflation already was a concern before Putin invaded Ukraine, and the resulting sanctions sent oil prices way up. Where do you think things are likely to go from here?
Well, they've stabilized and they've come down a bit because Shanghai is going into lockdown. So China's demand, if you will, for oil for production is not going to be that great. But there's one thing, Jake, you've got to remember with oil. The first whiff of further trouble, the first scintilla of possibility of supply problems, and that price will go back up again. So any respite that you're seeing now, any little bit of breathing room, take it while it's there, because it literally could go tomorrow. Oil prices are that volatile.
Higher fuel prices not only are affecting day-to-day life, it has people rethinking their plans for summer travel. What sort of ripple effects might that have?
Every bit of the economy. So you're going to have higher food prices. We already know that manufacturers, food manufacturers, growers, fertilizer. Let's hit one example. Fertilizer from Ukraine that can no longer be easily exported. The price goes up. Therefore, the food chain becomes more expensive. Hotels, fuel surcharges on airlines. I'm not trying to paint an unduly depressing picture as such, but what I'm trying to do, Jake, is give you a realistic view. The economy is in transition at the moment because of this war. And the higher oil prices, supply chain problems left over from the pandemic, along with a pandemic that is still very relevant in many parts of the world. That's why we're going to have difficult economic times in the United States and in Europe.
We want you to give it to us straight, Richard. No one's asking you to hold back. And on that subject, later this week, we're due to get some new readings on inflation and jobs and unemployment. Are you anticipating another round of gloomy headlines?
Oh, yes. Yes. Look, the Fed has two jobs, or one job and two things. It balances full employment with price stability. That's the dual mandate. Now, at the moment, unemployment is not really the big issue, but inflation is. So we know we're going to get 5, 6, maybe more interest rate rises this year. This is despite the fact that the economy is, to some extent, slowing down already. It's going to be difficult. It's a time for saving if you can. It's a time for watching the pennies if you can.
All right, Richard Quest, thanks so much. Always good to see you. Coming up next, that show-stopping slap. Let's get right to CNN's Ivan Watson, who's live in the southeast city of Zaporizhia, Ukraine. And Ivan, after 5 weeks of Russian attacks, Ukrainian President Zelensky, he says he's ready to discuss a pledge to keep out of NATO and assume a neutral stance. What might that look like? How will the Ukrainian people receive it?
Well, I mean, he also couched that by saying that if Ukraine was to move in that direction, that it would need a popular referendum, that the citizens of Ukraine would have to vote for it, but that would also have to wait for Russian occupying troops to leave Ukrainian territory, and that opens up a whole different can of worms, which is Crimea, which Russia grabbed in 2014 and later annexed, and then these two breakaway regions which the Russian government recognized their independent status in the early days of this more recent conflict. Another sticking point is that Zelensky has said he will not discuss with the Russians two of their pretexts for this unprovoked invasion, which they say is demilitarization and denazification. He says that those are ridiculous concepts that don't really apply to Ukraine, and so no negotiations can move forward if the Russians are going to stick to those two ideas. Jay.
Ivan, what exactly are residents facing in the southern part of Ukraine?
Oh, I mean, especially in that port city of Mariupol, the conditions are absolutely abominable. It is a modern day siege, and this city is one of the unofficial gateways for thousands of people who are fleeing that besieged city. They make a dangerous journey. They are traumatized and shell-shocked when they arrived, and I've been talking with some of these new arrivals. Now, Jake, the mayor of Mariupol, he says that there's an estimated 160,000 civilians still in the shattered city. He's calling for a complete evacuation of those people, but he accuses the Russian military of not allowing people to leave with buses that the Ukrainian government has organized for that. As for the city's defenders, we're in touch with them. They still control a part of Mariupol, and they say they are still fighting every hour and every day. Jake.
All right, Ivan Watson in Zaporizhia, Ukraine. Thank you. Please stay safe. Let's discuss all of this with the former CIA Chief of Russia Operations, Steve Hall, former United States Ambassador to Ukraine, Bill Taylor, and CNN Global Affairs analyst, Susan Glasser. And Steve, let me start with you. Today, President Biden said that he's going to stand by comments he made over the weekend when he said of Putin, for God's sake, this man cannot remain in power. Some people in the international community, especially the president of France, thought that might send an escalatory message of possibly regime change. Here's what President Biden had to say today.
I wasn't then, nor am I now, articulating a policy change. I was expressing the moral outrage that I feel, and I make no apologies for it. The last part of the speech was talking to the Russian people, telling them what we thought. And I was communicating this to not only the Russian people, but the whole world. This is just stating a simple fact that this kind of behavior is totally unacceptable, And the way to deal with it is to strengthen and keep NATO completely united and help Ukraine where we can.
So what do you make of all this? Do you think this statement what Biden said over the weekend, will have an effect on international affairs, on Putin?
I don't think, Jake, that it'll have an effect on Putin, largely because Putin makes up his mind about these things and indeed has made up his mind about whether or not the United States actually wants regime change long ago. When I served in Moscow back in early part of 2010, during the Barodnaya protests, we spoke to Russians on the streets there, and they said, oh, yes, Hillary Clinton, no doubt, is behind this, and they want regime change. So this comment is spoken out of a sense of moral outrage. And to be truthful about it, it's absolutely correct. There is no doubt that somebody like Vladimir Putin shouldn't be in charge of any country. And so the idea that this is going to complicate things somehow, I don't understand how exactly it would, because I don't think it complicates anything in the Kremlin.
And Ambassador Taylor, Ukraine's military intelligence head said that Russian President Vladimir Putin could be looking to carve Ukraine into two, like North and South Korea, occupied Ukraine, maybe to the south and east, free Ukraine to the west. Do Biden's comments about who should be in power embolden Putin in any way, do you think?
Jake, I don't think so. I don't think that that those comments had anything to do with the decision to try to to carve out a part of Ukraine. Putin carved out a part of Ukraine in 2014 when he first invaded. He carved out Crimea. He carved out a place we call Donbass. And if that's what they're going back to, that's actually a reduction in what they had planned to do. But that was an early effort, and that's if they're going back to that now, that probably reflects the problems that they're having on the battlefield. That probably reflects the problem. Ukrainian military has really bloodied the Russian military, and of course, Ukraine military is fighting for its own land, its own people, its own freedom. So if Putin is going to go back to just the Donbass and Crimea, that I think has nothing to do with anything that Biden said.
And Susan, President Biden was asked if he thinks that Putin might view his remark as escalatory. He said he didn't care. What do you think about that?
Well, look, I think Biden is embracing, he's used increasingly strong language in recent weeks, right? So it wasn't just this comment the other day. He's said that Putin essentially is a war criminal. He's a brutal dictator. And so this is of a piece, this comment, with where we've seen President Biden go. I think it reflects, first of all, Jake, a sense that there is very little to be gained right now in terms of negotiations with the Russians. That is not the comment of an American president who believes that he's going to be talking with the Russian leadership anytime soon or actually settling this war. So that's one takeaway I have from it. But also to Ambassador Taylor's point, look, Russia is talking about pulling back to the Donbass because they have failed in the first month of this invasion to accomplish any of Putin's strategic objectives. And, the scary part is that I don't think these negotiations right now with Ukraine seem to have much going for them until Putin can come up with some way of claiming victory. And if that's gobbling up another piece of Ukraine, the fear is, how does NATO and how does President Biden stop him from just thinking he can gobble it up in bits and pieces going forward?
Yeah. And Steve, President Zelensky, president of Ukraine, said over the weekend he gave a round of interviews to some of Russia's most prominent independent journalists. Zelensky told them he's ready to give Putin some of what he wants, to keep Ukraine neutral, not a member of NATO, to keep it non-nuclear. And he said he'd engage in a serious treaty. Will that be enough for Putin, or will Putin demand more, including seizing the Donbass region, as Susan just talked about?
Yeah, we'll see, Jake. It's really interesting because Finland actually historically faced a similar situation in about 1939 where the Russians invaded, and basically at the end of the invasion, the Russians said, look, you give us a big chunk of your country, Finland, and we'll let the rest of it remain a state. So if that's kind of what Putin is thinking is going to happen again, it'll be interesting to see. Zelensky has basically right now said, no, it's got to go to a referendum, and the territorial integrity is very important. So that's where the negotiations are going to start. Where they end up, it'll be really interesting to see.
I believe there was a Soviet leader at that time named Molotov, right? Is that where that comes from?
Indeed.
Steve, Susan, and Bill, thanks to all of you. Really appreciate it. What is it like to be one of the millions of Ukrainians